Okay, Alistair McIntyre, After Virtue, Chapter 4. It's Chapter 4. So philosophy seems like an odd and old and esoteric study today. It's old, it's odd, it's difficult, and most people think of it as being utterly irrelevant to our lives. Every now and then, if you're a freshman at a college, you might take Philosophy 101, and then you're done with it, you never think about it again. You ask a modern person, what is philosophy? They're like, yeah, it's weird old stuff that people study in college sometimes that has no effect on our lives. That seems to be the modern convention or the modern notion of it. However, in the 1700s and the 1800s, philosophy was a very important subject. People took it seriously. It wasn't something that was ghettoized in some corner of the university, but rather it was something that sort of was suffused and integrated and woven into the rest of society. And it was a serious matter. Why? Because it was the Enlightenment's quest to find a rational basis for morality. And everyone agreed that morality was important. Everyone thought it was a relevant issue. Kind of like the way today, in this moment, we all think justice is an important issue. We should all care about it. They, in that time, believed morality was very important, which is kind of like justice. Now, previously, morality was rooted in the Catholic Church, and then after the Reformation, in churches in general. And it was rooted in tradition, community, consensus, and authority, as we discussed a great deal in our class already. And as we have discussed, with the Enlightenment, all that went away. Tradition, community, consensus, authority, hierarchical authority, and the authority of the church as well. That all went away with the Enlightenment. And it was all about the new. It was about reason and science. Reason and science is the foundation of all truth during and after the Enlightenment. And it was frankly the only reliable foundation. Everything else was wrong or superstitious, or certainly couldn't hold universal authority over everyone. It was no longer the binding agent that held the world together under a sacred canopy. So if that's the case, then what happens to morality? You've gotten rid of the old foundations and justifications for morality, and now the world's going to be Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, that really can't be the case, right? We can't let that happen. So these Enlightenment people think we need a new foundation. And everyone cared, everyone in society cared about building a new foundation, a new glue that'll hold together. And so the answer was going to be philosophy. Philosophy as a discipline, as a subject, was a public project. And public morality needed to be based on reason and evidence, universal reason and logic. Just like gravity, right? Gravity was based on universal reason and logic and evidence, and it was an irrefutable universal consensus. So similarly, the way Isaac Newton explained how gravity would hold what it was, and everyone had to agree on it ultimately when he proved it, there was a project to say, let's come up with a logical, empirical, abstract, and irrefutable understanding of what is morality and what it's based on. So that was the Enlightenment project for morality. And you know the thesis by now. The project failed. But McIntyre wants to explore how and why it failed. And so in this chapter, he moves backwards chronologically. So he begins with things that are more recent and then moves backwards. It's an interesting way to go. He begins with Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard wrote a book called Enten Eller, or it's commonly translated into English as Either Or. In this lecture, I'm going to call it Either Or because that's what I'm familiar with. That's what I'm comfortable with. That's how I've read it. This book, Either Or, by Kierkegaard, is really about morality. First of all, Kierkegaard was raised as a Christian, and he was one throughout his life. And he had very conventional morals, but he could not base his morals on traditional foundations, as we've discussed already. For Kierkegaard, morality was based on a choice. You might even say an arbitrary choice. You must choose. You can't reason your way into the right choice. So there are two choices. He divides the world into the ethical or the aesthetic. By the aesthetic, I mean beauty or sensuality or the feelings. Let me explain. Ethical is about duty and obligation. You do the right thing because it is the right thing. How you feel about it is completely irrelevant. Your will and the totality of your being is submitted and yielded to the authority of moral principles outside of yourself. Your feelings, so what? It does not matter. The alternative is the aesthetic. This is akin to authenticity, as we discussed. Or a really great way to think through this is romanticism. Think of the sorrows of young Werther. You are driven, your Werther is driven by some inner drive and desire that has nothing to do with reason, obligation, external authority, the thoughts of those around you, conventional morality, expectations, or anything else that compels you. Okay, that's all rejected. You're driven by your heart, your passions, some inner desire that drives you. And frankly, these inner desires are completely loopy and crazy. That doesn't matter because your heart is not accountable to even logic or reason. You're driven by your gut and your feeling. It's just desire will bulldoze everything out of the way, and you're driven by desire. And anything else, in a sense, is on by this standard. Anything else is almost immoral. It's like immoral to deny the truth of your own heart. Your heart creates the truth, and you must be faithful to that truth. Think of marriage as a way to think through these two options, and that's one MacIntyre brings up. The ethical way of looking at marriage. Imagine I'm a pre-modern man. My dad is a village blacksmith. My family, in fact, the whole village has determined that I will marry the farmer's daughter. I barely know the girl. I've seen her in church. My response, yes, of course I'm going to marry her. Do I like her? Do I find her attractive? Is she my soulmate, a la sorrows of young Werther? Whatever. I don't know. Maybe she is. Maybe she isn't. Who cares? That question is not even on the menu. Whatever. It's not about me. It's my obligation to the community. I yield myself to the greater good. Do I stay faithful to her throughout the course of my life? Do I cheat on her? Of course I don't cheat on her. Do I stay faithful to her? Of course I do. Do I desire to run off with, the cobbler's daughter sometime? Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. It doesn't matter. It's not about my desire. My desires are irrelevant. I yield myself to the greater good, to the greater truth. I submit myself totally to the obligations and the morality and the truth of the reality around me. I'm just part of a larger world. The aesthetic. Long story short, again, stars of young Werther. This morality is, I gotta keep it real. I gotta keep it honest. Gotta be true to myself. The ethics of authenticity. So, do I marry the girl? No, of course not. I don't want to. Do I run off with some girl that's utterly inappropriate? Of course. Do I break all moral social conventions? Of course. But the morality I'm following is the morality of my heart, my own authentic morality. It's not about anyone else. So you're faced with these two moral systems in a sense. They both have a certain heuristic morality that exists within itself, but they're incompatible. And Kierkegaard says you must choose the ethical, not the aesthetic. It's the right choice, and you just make the right choice. And it's not based on reason or logic or evidence. Okay, I mean, both choices have their own reason and logic, right? But or their own internal sense. But it's not based on reason or logic. Why? Well, this is really tricky. Why can't I make this choice based on reason or logic? Because if I need to follow and totally yield to an authority outside of myself, and if I logically deduce that the ethical path is a right one, who am I following? Am I following the ethical path? Am I following the dictates of an authority outside of me? No, actually, in a very strange way, and this is actually true, I believe this is true. If I choose to follow the path of reason and logic, and that leads me to the ethical path, then who am I following? I'm actually following me. You understand, when I logically and reasonably choose the ethical, I'm in fact making myself the ultimate authority over everything. It's my logic that leads me to follow the path of the ethical. Also, if I'm faced with a choice, if I choose logic and reason, I will inevitably choose the ethical. So it seems like even before I choose the logical reason to go for the ethical, I've got to choose myself. Do I choose logic? Okay, I am choosing to think logically. You know what I'm saying? I'm choosing to think logically. And if I choose logically, then I will inevitably go to the ethical path. But the ethical path cannot be about the authority and autonomy of my logic. You understand? It's weird. It's more like if I'm choosing logic and reason to go the ethical path, then I'm not yielding myself to the totality of the authority of something other than me. I'm actually yielding to my own lot. I'm choosing logic, and I'm making the ethical path yield to my choice of logic. And so then I'm still the one in charge now. There's still a radical subjectivity here. So it's just a choice. I just choose and give myself to that authority. And it's not tied to logic or reason. Because logic and reason would put me in charge of things, because it's my interpretation of logic and reason. It's about the submission to an external and other kind of authority. I hope that makes sense. I find that really fascinating, interesting, and really mind-twisting. Now, why did Kierkegaard reject reason and logic as a path to morality, as a foundation for morality? Because he was responding to the philosopher that came before him, Immanuel Kant. And Immanuel Kant wanted morality based on reason and logic alone. Morality, according to Kant, cannot be based on God, and it cannot be based on desire, and it cannot be based on personal experience, and it cannot be based on personal happiness. But once again, morality cannot be based on God, and it cannot be based on faith. It cannot be based on the church. It must be based on reason and reason alone. Logical, dispassionate, abstract reason. The way you understand mathematics, the way you understand physics, right? It must be based on reason and evidence, and it must be universal. So Kant is looking for what we call universal moral maxims. I mean, the laws of morality, and they must be universal, and they must be true at all times. Kant, again, the analogy might be mathematics. There are certain laws about mathematics that are always true throughout all eternity. They'll be true throughout the universe, and they will never change. And it's got nothing to do with your personal subjectivity or how you feel about it. It's got nothing to do with how it affects you. It's just true in itself, isolated from all perception. That is what morality is for Immanuel Kant. It is logical and not subjective, again, just like the laws of physics, just like principles of mathematics. For example, thou shalt not kill. It's true, okay? We can all agree thou shalt not kill is true for all times, all people, all places, regardless of your personal feelings or circumstances. We just decide, and we can deduce logically, one should not kill. A universal moral maxim. Here's a famous one that Kant came up with. It's called the Kantian categorical imperative. That's one of those things you just have to remember. Kant equals the Kantian categorical imperative. And this is what he came up with. Treat all people like an ends and not a means. Okay, that's one of his big laws that one can deduce logically, abstractly. Meaning, I don't use you for some ulterior purpose. For example, I hire you and I tell you that I want you to be a professor in my history department because you are great. This is what I tell you. I think you're great. And I tell you, this will be good for you. You're going to like this. It's going to be good for your career. But secretly, I know that next year budget cuts are coming. And I know someone in my department needs to get cut. So I really hired you as a patsy so that you will get fired a year from now. Why? Because I don't want to get fired. And if I hire you, you're clearly worse than me. They're going to fire you, not me. Okay, so I'm using you as a means, not an end. I'm not using you as an end in itself. I'm using you to get something else without telling you about it. So that's one of these big famous things Kant came up with. Treat people like an ends, not a means. ENDS, ends, not a means. Now, Kant's categorical imperative is problematic. Basically, every freshman in philosophy 101 throughout the entire American university system for the past 50 years writes a paper poking holes in Kant's categorical imperative and explaining why it's problematic. It's rife with contradictions and inconsistencies. Again, there's got to be a million freshman papers out there who are pointing these things out. But here's one important problem. So it's logically true, right? Kant can come up with all these moral maxims, these categorical imperatives that are logically true. All right, fine. But nothing can compel me to follow it. Fine. Is murder wrong? Sure. We can prove murder is wrong universally by Kant's categories. But what stops me from being murderous? What stops me from using people like a means and not an end? You can't really force my hand. And beyond that, there are also many ways to show how Kantian categorical imperative, it just contradicts itself. It doesn't actually hold true. Okay, ultimately, Kant failed, and Kierkegaard knew it. And that's why Kierkegaard wrote the way he wrote. He was writing against Kant or trying to answer Kant. Now, why did Kant write the way he wrote? Because Kant was responding to two philosophers that came before him, Hume and Diderot. They were trying to find a philosophical basis for morality, just like the other guys, right? Kant said reason, not desire. Why? Because Hume and Diderot based their morality on desire. For Diderot, this is what he believed. Morality is a pursuit of personal desire informed and shaped by the Enlightenment, okay? So in other words, rather than having external rules dictate this, morality, follow your own heart. Listen to your own being. He will say, pursue your passions, except do it with your long-term goals in mind. If you pursue your passions and natural desires with your long-term goals in mind, you will make moral choices. Animal desires or base, passionate, lower desires must be subordinated to longer-term desires. And you have to think through how to order our desires. For example, okay, let's say I'm in college. I desire to join a fraternity and live like Bacchus. I want to drink and party every day. That's a real desire in my heart. However, I also have a desire to get really, really rich one day by becoming a high-powered lawyer, by getting into Harvard Law School. But in order for me to get to Harvard Law School and become a high-powered attorney, to get super rich, I've got to study really, really hard and get straight A's. So I have conflicting desires. Live like Bacchus, be really, really rich when I grow up. So if I'm enlightened, if I'm smart, if I'm educated, I have to learn how to subordinate my short-term desire, live like Bacchus, for my long-term desire, be filthy rich in the future for the rest of my life. So then I will study really, really hard instead of living like a party animal. And that is a moral choice. Okay. Now, Diderot's ideas are problematic for many reasons. How do you determine how to order your desires? And my pursuit, and my pursuit of my higher long-term desires could still make me a horrible, immoral person. You can figure that out on your own, right? Desire themselves, even if they're higher desires, could still make me a jerk. And also, again, how do I figure out? It's rather arbitrary, isn't it? What is a higher desire? What's a lower desire? Ultimately, Diderot fails. Hume is another philosopher that's like Diderot. He also builds his morality on desires. Moral judgments are based on passion and feelings. For Hume, morality is based on passion and feelings because Hume concludes we are moved by passion and feelings, not reason. And also utility. We need to act, according to Hume, we need to act in a manner that will get us to our long-term goals. We're driven by passion and feeling, right? But here's one problem. What is my long-term goals? And what if my long-term goals are served by breaking moral rules? For example, let's go back to my other example. I'm in college, okay? Frat lawyer, fine. I've determined I want to be a lawyer. I'm going to put away my bacchanal frat boy ways and set my butt off to be a rich lawyer. But I'm struggling in class, right? And so I know that if I cheat, I will get straight A's. Cheating helps me with my long-term passions and desires and goals. That's not moral. Hume and Diderot both fail. So here's a conclusion. Hume and Diderot try to build a morality on feeling. Fail. In response, Kant tries to build a morality on pure reason, not personal feelings or experience. Fail. In response, Kierkegaard tries to build a morality not based on feeling or reason, but just choice. But that also fails. Something to keep in mind, all four of these guys, like the men of their time, they all have very conventional morality. And the morality looks a lot like Christianity. It's based on Christianity. But their morality has no foundation in Christianity. So they are searching for a new foundation. That is the Enlightenment project for morality. And they all failed.